In the late summer of 1796, the most powerful man in America sat down to give that power away. He had been offered, in everything but name, a crown. He could have held the presidency until the day he died. Instead, George Washington picked up a pen and told the country he was going home. What he left behind was not a speech. It was never spoken aloud. It ran in a Philadelphia newspaper, addressed simply to friends and fellow citizens, a letter from a departing father to a young and fragile republic. We know it today as the Farewell Address. You're listening to Washington's Farewell Address, modernized for today's reader and produced by Updated Works. Washington was not writing to flatter the nation. He was writing to warn it. He had watched the new country nearly come apart, and he wanted to name the dangers before he left the stage. Guard the Union above all else, he says. It is the pillar that holds up your liberty. Beware the spirit of party, the rage of faction that turns countrymen into enemies and opens the door to tyranny. Hold religion and morality close, for they are the supports of a free people. And toward the wider world, he gives the warning that would echo for a century. Extend your commerce, but steer clear of permanent alliances. Read it now, and it can feel less like history than like a letter that arrived early, addressed to us. This is the full, unabridged address, carried into clear, contemporary English by Updated Works, preserving every argument and turn of Washington's thought. Explore the full library at updatedworks.com. Now, Washington's Farewell Address.
Friends and fellow citizens, the time for a new election to choose a citizen who will lead the executive branch of the United States is approaching, and the moment has come when you must decide who will be entrusted with that important responsibility. I believe it's appropriate, especially since it may help clarify the public's voice, to inform you now of my decision. I will not allow my name to be considered among those from whom you will choose. At the same time, I ask you to understand that I haven't made this decision lightly. I've carefully considered every obligation that binds a responsible citizen to his country. In withdrawing my availability for service, which my silence might have implied, I'm not motivated by any weakening of my commitment to your future welfare, nor by any lack of grateful appreciation for your past support. Instead, I'm convinced that this decision is fully compatible with both. My acceptance of the office to which you elected me twice, and my continuation in it until now, has been a constant sacrifice of personal preference to what I saw as my duty and to what seemed to be your wishes. I kept hoping that I would be able, much sooner and without abandoning principles I couldn't ignore, to return to the private life from which I had been reluctantly called. Before the last election, my desire to do this was so strong that I actually prepared an address to announce it to you. But after careful thought about the complicated and dangerous state of our foreign affairs at that time, and after receiving unanimous advice from people whose judgment I trusted, I decided to set the idea aside. I'm glad that the state of your affairs, both foreign and domestic, no longer makes it impossible to follow my personal wishes without violating my sense of duty or what's appropriate. I'm convinced that whatever fondness you may still have for my service, given our country's current situation, you won't disapprove of my decision to retire. I explained my feelings when I first took on this difficult responsibility. As for how I've carried out this trust, I'll only say that I've done my best, with good intentions, to help organize and run the government to the fullest extent my very imperfect judgment allowed. I knew from the start that I wasn't fully qualified for the job, and experience has only reinforced my doubts about myself, probably even more in others' eyes than in my own. Every day as I grow older, I feel more strongly that retirement is not just something I need, but something I'll welcome. I'm satisfied that whatever special value my service may have had was only temporary. I take comfort in believing that while both personal preference and good sense tell me to leave political life, patriotism doesn't forbid it. Looking ahead to the moment when my public life will end, I cannot help but acknowledge the deep gratitude I owe to my beloved country for the many honors it has given me. Even more, I'm grateful for the unwavering confidence with which you have supported me, and for the opportunities I've had to demonstrate my unshakable devotion through faithful and persistent service, even when my usefulness fell short of my dedication. If our country has benefited from these services, let it always be remembered to your credit and as an instructive lesson in our history, that under circumstances where passions ran high in every direction and could easily mislead, amid situations that were sometimes unclear and fortunes that often seemed discouraging, in moments when failure frequently invited criticism, your constant support was the essential foundation of my efforts and a guarantee that my plans would succeed. This truth has made a profound impression on me, and I will carry it to my grave as a powerful motivation for endless prayers that heaven may continue to grant you its greatest blessings, that your unity and brotherly love may last forever, that the free constitution you created with your own hands may be held sacred, that its administration in every branch may be marked by wisdom and virtue, and that finally the happiness of the people of these states, under the protection of liberty, may be made complete by preserving and using this blessing so carefully and wisely that you earn the glory of recommending it to the admiration, affection, and adoption of every nation that does not yet know it. Here perhaps I should stop, but my concern for your welfare, which will only end with my life, and the fear of danger that naturally comes with that concern, push me on an occasion like this to offer for your serious consideration, and to urge you to review frequently some thoughts that come from deep reflection and considerable observation, and which seem to me absolutely vital to the lasting happiness of our people. I offer these thoughts more freely because you can only see in them the honest warnings of a departing friend who could have no personal reason to slant his advice. And I can't forget, as encouragement, how kindly you received my thoughts on a previous and similar occasion. Since love of liberty is woven into the very fabric of your hearts, no recommendation from me is needed to strengthen or confirm that attachment. The unity of government that makes you one people is precious to you now, and rightly so. It stands as a main pillar supporting your real independence, your peace at home and abroad, your safety, your prosperity, and that very liberty you prize so highly. But it's easy to predict that many people, for various reasons and from different directions, will work hard and use every trick they can to weaken your conviction in this truth. This is the point in your political fortress that internal and external enemies will attack most constantly and actively, though often secretly and deceptively. It's critically important, then, that you properly understand the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness. You should nurture a sincere, habitual, and unshakable attachment to it. Get in the habit of thinking and speaking of it as the guardian of your political safety and prosperity. Watch over its preservation with vigilant concern. Reject anything that even hints it could ever be abandoned, and respond with indignation to the first sign of any attempt to separate any part of our country from the rest, or to weaken the sacred ties that now bind the various parts together. You have every reason to feel this bond of sympathy and shared interest. Whether you were born here or chose to become citizens, this country deserves your wholehearted devotion. The name American, which defines you as a nation, should inspire a deeper patriotic pride than any label tied to regional differences. Despite minor variations, you share the same religion, customs, habits, and political principles. You fought and won together in a common cause. The independence and liberty you now enjoy came from shared planning and effort, from facing the same dangers, enduring the same hardships, and celebrating the same victories. Yet, as powerful as these emotional appeals may be, they pale in comparison to considerations that directly affect your practical interests. Every part of our country has compelling reasons to carefully protect and preserve the unity of the whole. The North, through unrestricted trade with the South and protected by the equal laws of a shared government, finds in Southern products major new opportunities for maritime and commercial ventures, along with valuable raw materials for manufacturing. The South, through this same exchange and benefiting from Northern enterprise, sees its agriculture flourish and its trade expand. By drawing some of the North's sailors into its own channels, the South strengthens its shipping industry, and while it contributes in various ways to building up the nation's overall maritime capacity, it looks forward to the protection of naval power that it cannot develop as effectively on its own. The East, through similar trade with the West, already finds and will increasingly find as inland transportation by land and water improves, a profitable market for goods it imports or manufactures domestically. The West gets from the East the supplies it needs for growth and prosperity. But perhaps even more importantly, the West must necessarily depend on the weight, influence, and future naval strength of the Atlantic states to guarantee secure access to essential outlets for its own products, all united by an unbreakable community of interest as one nation. Any other arrangement by which the West might try to secure this vital advantage, whether through its own independent strength or through some traitorous and unnatural alliance with a foreign power, would be fundamentally unstable. Since every part of our country feels a direct and specific stake in the Union, all the parts together will inevitably find in this combined mass of resources and efforts greater strength, greater capacity, and proportionally greater security from external threats. They will also experience less frequent disruption of their peace by foreign nations. And, what matters most, they will gain from union an escape from those conflicts and wars among themselves that so often plague neighboring countries not bound together by the same government. These conflicts would arise from their own rivalries alone, but opposing foreign alliances, loyalties, and schemes would fuel and intensify them. For the same reason, they will avoid the need for those bloated military establishments that threaten liberty under any form of government, and that pose a particular danger to Republican liberty. In this sense, your union should be seen as a main pillar of your freedom, and your love for one should make you cherish the preservation of the other. These considerations speak persuasively to every thoughtful and virtuous mind, and they show that maintaining the Union should be a primary goal of patriotic commitment. Is there any doubt whether a single government can cover such a vast territory? Let experience answer that question. To rely on mere theory in such a case would be irresponsible. We have good reason to hope that a proper organization of the whole, supported by state governments for their respective regions, will produce a successful outcome for this experiment. It deserves a fair and complete trial. With such powerful and clear reasons for union affecting all parts of our country, as long as experience has not proven it impossible, we will always have reason to question the patriotism of anyone, anywhere, who tries to weaken its bonds. When I think about the forces that might tear our union apart, one thing deeply troubles me. We've given people grounds to divide us by geography into northern and southern, Atlantic and western camps. Ambitious manipulators can use these labels to convince people that different regions actually have conflicting interests and worldviews. One of the oldest tricks political factions use to gain power in specific areas is to distort what other regions believe and want. You can't guard yourselves too carefully against the suspicion and resentment that grow from these distortions. They turn people who should be united like family into strangers and enemies. The people living in our Western territories recently learned this lesson firsthand. They watched the executive branch negotiate and the Senate unanimously ratify the treaty with Spain, and they saw the overwhelming approval this received across the entire country. This proved decisively how baseless the rumors were that had spread among them. Rumors claiming the federal government and the Atlantic states were working against their interests regarding the Mississippi River. They witnessed the creation of two treaties, one with Great Britain and one with Spain, that gave them everything they could have hoped for in our foreign relations and strengthened their prosperity. Wouldn't it be wise for them to rely on the Union, which secured these benefits, to preserve them? Won't they now ignore those troublemakers, if any exist, who would cut them off from their fellow Americans and tie them to foreign powers instead? Your union needs a central government to be effective and lasting. No matter how strict the alliances between individual parts might be, they can never be an adequate substitute. Such alliances will inevitably suffer the same violations and disruptions that all alliances throughout history have experienced. Understanding this crucial truth, you improved on your first attempt by adopting a constitution that works better than your previous system for creating a close union and managing your shared interests effectively. This government, born from your own free choice, without outside pressure or intimidation, adopted after thorough investigation and careful thought, completely free in its principles and in how it distributes power, combining security with energy, and containing within itself the means for its own amendment, deserves your confidence and support. Respecting its authority, following its laws, and accepting its decisions are duties required by the fundamental principles of true liberty. Our political system rests on the right of the people to create and change their constitutions of government. But whatever constitution exists at any given time remains binding on everyone until the whole people change it through an explicit and legitimate act. The very concept that the people have the power and right to establish government assumes that every individual has a duty to obey the government once it's established. Any obstacles to enforcing the law, any groups or organizations, no matter how reasonable they seem, whose real purpose is to manipulate, control, oppose, or intimidate the normal deliberations and actions of our constitutional authorities, undermine this fundamental principle and lead to disaster. These groups create organized factions and give them artificial, outsized power. They replace the delegated will of the nation with the will of a party, often a small but clever and aggressive minority. As different parties take turns winning, they turn public administration into a reflection of factions' poorly planned and contradictory schemes, rather than an instrument of consistent and sound policies developed through common deliberation and balanced by mutual interests. While groups or organizations like these may occasionally serve popular purposes, over time they're likely to become powerful tools that cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will use to undermine the people's power and seize control of the government for themselves. Once they've achieved their unjust dominion, they'll destroy the very instruments that lifted them to power. To preserve your government and maintain your current state of happiness, you need to do more than just consistently oppose irregular challenges to its recognized authority. You must also carefully resist any attempts to innovate on its core principles, no matter how appealing the justifications might sound. One way to attack the system is to make changes to the constitutional structure that weaken its effectiveness, thereby undermining what can't be directly destroyed. Whenever you're invited to make changes, remember that time and habit are just as necessary for establishing the true character of governments as they are for any other human institution. Experience is the most reliable standard for testing how well a country's existing constitution actually works. Being too quick to make changes based on mere theories and opinions leaves you vulnerable to constant upheaval, since there's an endless supply of theories and opinions. Remember especially that managing your common interests effectively in a country as large as ours requires a government with as much strength as is compatible with complete liberty. Liberty itself will find its best protection in such a government, one with powers properly distributed and balanced. In fact, liberty becomes little more than an empty word when the government is too weak to resist the schemes of factions, to keep each member of society within the boundaries set by law, and to ensure everyone's secure and peaceful enjoyment of their personal and property rights. I've already mentioned the danger of political parties in the nation, particularly when they're based on regional divisions. Let me now take a broader view and warn you in the strongest possible terms about the destructive effects of partisan spirit in general. This tendency, unfortunately, is inseparable from human nature, rooted in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists in different forms in all governments, more or less suppressed, controlled, or restrained. But in democracies, it appears in its most virulent form and is truly their worst enemy. The back-and-forth domination of one faction over another, intensified by the spirit of revenge natural to partisan conflict, has committed the most horrific atrocities across different ages and countries. This cycle is itself a frightening despotism, but it eventually leads to an even more formal and permanent despotism. The chaos and suffering that result gradually push people to seek security and stability in the absolute power of a single individual. And sooner or later, the leader of some dominant faction, more capable or more fortunate than his rivals, exploits this desire to elevate himself on the ruins of public liberty. Even without looking ahead to such an extreme outcome, which nevertheless should not be entirely ignored, the ordinary and constant damage caused by partisan spirit is enough to make it both the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. It always serves to disrupt public decision-making and weaken public administration. It stirs up the community with baseless suspicions and false alarms. It inflames the hostility of one group against another, and occasionally incites riots and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which find easy access to the government itself through the channels of partisan passion. In this way, the policy and will of one country become subject to the policy and will of another. Some people believe that political parties in free countries serve as useful checks on government administration and help keep the spirit of liberty alive. Within certain limits, this is probably true. In monarchical governments, patriots may even look favorably, or at least tolerantly, on the party spirit. But in governments of a popular character, in purely elective systems, this spirit should not be encouraged. Given its natural tendency, there will always be enough of it for any beneficial purpose. And since there's constant danger of excess, the effort should be to use public opinion to soften and calm it. Like a fire that cannot be extinguished, it requires constant vigilance to prevent it from bursting into flame, lest instead of warming us, it consumes us entirely. It's equally important that in a free country, the habits of thinking should make those entrusted with government cautious to stay within their respective constitutional boundaries, avoiding any attempt by one branch to encroach on another's powers. The spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate all the powers of government into one branch, creating a real despotism, regardless of what form the government takes. A realistic assessment of the love of power and the tendency to abuse it that dominates the human heart is enough to convince us this is true. The need for reciprocal checks on political power, achieved by dividing and distributing it into different repositories, and making each one a guardian of the public good against invasions by the others, has been proven by experiments both ancient and modern, some of them in our own country, right before our eyes. Preserving these checks is just as necessary as establishing them in the first place. If, in the people's opinion, the distribution or modification of constitutional powers is wrong in any particular way, let it be corrected by an amendment through the process the Constitution designates. But don't allow change through usurpation, because even though this might serve good purposes in one instance, it's the usual weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The precedent will always far outweigh in permanent evil any partial or temporary benefit that such use might yield at any given time. Among all the attitudes and practices that contribute to political success, religion and morality are essential foundations. Anyone who tries to undermine these great pillars of human happiness, these strongest supports for the duties of both individuals and citizens, has no right to call themselves a patriot. The practical politician should respect and promote them just as much as the devout believer does. An entire book couldn't fully describe how they connect to both private and public well-being. Just ask yourself this: where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if people no longer feel religiously bound by the oaths that form the basis of testimony in courts of justice? And we should be very careful before assuming that morality can survive without religion. While we might grant that refined education can shape certain exceptional minds, both reason and experience tell us We cannot expect national morality to thrive without religious principles. It's fundamentally true that virtue, or morality, is a necessary foundation for democratic government. This principle applies with varying degrees of force to every type of free government. Who among us, if we genuinely support such government, can remain indifferent when people try to shake its very foundation? Therefore, treat institutions that spread knowledge widely as a matter of primary importance. To the extent that a government structure gives power to public opinion, it becomes essential that public opinion be well informed. Treat public credit as a vital source of national strength and security. One way to preserve it is to use it as sparingly as possible. Cultivate peace to avoid unnecessary expenses. But remember that spending money to prepare for danger often prevents far greater costs later when you have to respond to actual threats. Avoid piling up debt, not just by steering clear of unnecessary spending, but by working hard during peacetime to pay off whatever debts unavoidable wars have created. Don't selfishly dump on future generations the burdens we should carry ourselves. Your elected representatives are responsible for putting these principles into practice, but they need public opinion on their side. To make their job easier, you need to keep some practical realities in mind. Paying off debts requires revenue. Revenue requires taxes. And no tax system exists that doesn't create some inconvenience and displeasure. The inherent difficulty of choosing what to tax, which always means choosing between bad options, should make you more charitable when judging the government's decisions, and more willing to accept whatever revenue measures the nation's needs require at any given time. Maintain good faith and justice toward all nations and cultivate peace and harmony with everyone. Religion and morality demand this kind of conduct, and doesn't sound policy demand it just as much? A free, enlightened nation, destined for greatness, should give humanity the generous and all too rare example of a people always guided by high justice and goodwill. Who can doubt that over time the benefits of such an approach would more than compensate for any temporary advantages we might sacrifice by sticking to it? Can it really be that Providence hasn't linked a nation's lasting happiness with its virtue? The experiment, at least, deserves support from every impulse that elevates human nature. But is it made impossible by our vices? In carrying out this kind of policy, nothing matters more than avoiding deep-seated hostility toward certain nations and passionate devotion to others. Instead, we should cultivate fair and friendly attitudes toward everyone. A nation that allows itself to habitually hate or habitually favor another country becomes, to some extent, a slave. It enslaves itself to its anger or its affection, and either emotion is enough to pull it away from its duty and its interests. When one nation feels antipathy toward another, both become quicker to insult and injure each other, to seize on minor grievances, and to act arrogant and stubborn when small or accidental disputes arise. This leads to frequent clashes and bitter, vicious, bloody conflicts. A nation driven by hostility and resentment sometimes pushes its government into war against the government's better judgment. Sometimes the government shares the nation's prejudice and acts on passion rather than reason. At other times, it exploits the nation's animosity to pursue aggressive policies motivated by pride, ambition, and other corrupt and destructive impulses. The peace, and sometimes even the freedom of nations, has fallen victim to this dynamic. When one nation becomes passionately attached to another, it creates all kinds of problems. Sympathy for the favored nation encourages the illusion of shared interests where none actually exist, and it imports that nation's enemies as our own. This draws the sympathetic nation into the quarrels and wars of its favorite without good reason or justification. It also leads to granting the favored nation privileges denied to others, which doubly harms the nation making these concessions. First, by giving away what should have been kept, and second, by provoking jealousy, resentment, and retaliation from those denied equal treatment. And it makes it easier for ambitious, corrupt, or misguided citizens who dedicate themselves to the favorite nation to betray or sacrifice their own country's interests without facing public disgrace, sometimes even while enjoying popular support. They disguise their base or foolish compliance with ambition, corruption, or delusion behind the appearance of virtuous obligation, proper respect for public opinion, or admirable dedication to the public good. As channels for foreign influence in countless ways, such attachments should particularly alarm any truly informed and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they create to manipulate domestic factions, to practice the arts of manipulation, to distort public opinion, to influence or intimidate our government? When a small or weak nation forms such an attachment to a great and powerful one, the former is doomed to become the satellite of the latter. I urge you to believe me, fellow citizens. A free people must stay constantly alert to the subtle threats of foreign influence. History and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most destructive enemies of republican government. But this vigilance, to be effective, must be impartial. Otherwise, it becomes a tool of the very influence we're trying to avoid, rather than a defense against it. Excessive favoritism toward one foreign nation and excessive hostility toward another cause people to see danger only on one side. This serves to hide and even assist the manipulations coming from the other side. True patriots who resist the schemes of the favored nation become suspected and hated, while its agents and dupes win the people's praise and trust, only to betray their interests. The great rule of conduct for us in dealing with foreign nations is this: expand our commercial relationships, but keep political connections to an absolute minimum. As for commitments we've already made, let's fulfill them with complete integrity. And then, let's stop there. Europe has a set of core interests that either don't concern us at all or affect us only distantly. This means Europe will constantly be involved in conflicts that have nothing to do with our interests. It would be foolish, therefore, for us to entangle ourselves through artificial ties in the routine ups and downs of European politics, or in the usual formations and clashes of European alliances and rivalries. Our isolated and distant location invites us and allows us to follow a different path. If we stay united as one people under an effective government, the day isn't far off when we can ignore any serious harm from outside interference. We'll be able to adopt a position that makes any neutrality we choose to declare strictly respected. Hostile nations, unable to take anything from us by force, won't casually risk provoking us. We'll be free to choose peace or war as our interests, guided by justice, advise. Why give up the benefits of such a unique position? Why abandon our own ground to stand on foreign soil? Why tangle our peace and prosperity in the snares of European ambition, rivalry, interests, moods, or whims by weaving our fate together with any part of Europe? Our true policy is to avoid permanent alliances with any part of the foreign world. At least, that's what I mean as far as we're currently free to do so. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting we break faith with existing commitments. I believe the principle that honesty is always the best policy applies just as much to public affairs as to private ones. So I repeat, let those commitments be honored in their true sense. But in my opinion, it's unnecessary and would be foolish to expand them. As long as we maintain ourselves in a respectable defensive position through appropriate military establishments, we can safely rely on temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. Harmony and open relations with all nations are recommended by sound policy, humanity, and self-interest. But even our trade policy should treat everyone equally and impartially, neither seeking nor offering exclusive favors or preferences, consulting the natural course of things, spreading and diversifying the streams of commerce through gentle means, but forcing nothing, establishing with like-minded powers in order to give trade a stable course, to define the rights of our merchants, and to enable the government to support them, conventional rules of interaction, the best that present circumstances and mutual opinion will permit, but temporary and subject to being abandoned or changed from time to time as experience and circumstances dictate. Always keeping in view that it is foolish for one nation to expect selfless favors from another, that it must pay with a portion of its independence for whatever it accepts under that pretense, that by such acceptance it may find itself in the position of having given equivalence for nominal favors and yet being accused of ingratitude for not giving more. There can be no greater mistake than to expect or count on real favors from nation to nation. It is an illusion that experience must cure, that proper pride should reject. In offering you, my countrymen, these counsels of an old and affectionate friend, I don't dare hope they will make the strong and lasting impression I could wish, that they will control the usual current of the passions, or prevent our nation from running the course that has so far marked the destiny of nations. But if I may even allow myself to think that they may produce some partial benefit, some occasional good, that they may now and then come to mind to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the dangers of foreign intrigue, to guard against the deceptions of pretended patriotism, this hope will be full recompense for the concern for your welfare by which they have been inspired. How well I've followed these principles in my official duties must be judged by the public record and other evidence of my conduct. As for myself, I can say with a clear conscience that I have at least believed I was following them. Regarding the ongoing war in Europe, my proclamation of April 22, 1793, shows my plan. With your approval and that of your representatives in both houses of Congress, the spirit of that measure has consistently guided me, unaffected by any attempts to discourage or divert me from it. After careful examination, with the best information I could gather, I became convinced that our country, given all the circumstances, had a right to take a neutral position and was bound by both duty and interest to do so. Having taken that position, I decided to maintain it, as far as it depended on me, with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. I don't need to explain here the reasoning behind our right to take this course. I'll only point out that, as I understand it, this right has not been denied by any of the warring powers. In fact, all of them have essentially admitted it. The duty to remain neutral can be inferred simply from the obligation that justice and humanity place on every nation when it's free to act to preserve peaceful and friendly relations with other nations. The practical reasons for this conduct are best left to your own reflection and experience. For me, the main motive has been to buy time for our country to establish and strengthen its still young institutions, and to grow without interruption to the level of strength and stability needed to give it, humanly speaking, control of its own destiny. Looking back over my time in office, I'm not aware of any deliberate mistakes, but I know my shortcomings well enough to realize I've probably made plenty of errors. Whatever they are, I pray earnestly that God will prevent or lessen any harm they might cause. I also hope that my country will always look on them with understanding, and that after 45 years of service with honest dedication, the mistakes that came from my limited abilities will be forgotten, just as I myself will soon pass into the rest of the grave. Trusting in this kindness as I have in everything else, and driven by the deep love I feel for a country that is the birthplace of myself and my ancestors for several generations, I look forward with real pleasure to the retirement where I expect to enjoy, without any bitterness, the simple happiness of living among my fellow citizens under the gentle influence of good laws in a free government. The thing I've always cared about most, and the reward, I trust, of everything we've worked for, struggled through, and risked together. George Washington, United States, September 17, 1796.